Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Peaceful Nik, the medium, and I am joined by the incredible and amazing Dr. Eben Alexander, the author of Proof of Heaven, and we're going to get into it. I want to tell you a little bit about Dr. Alexander. He was an academic neurosurgeon for over 25 years, including 15 years at the Brigham and Women's Hospital, Children's Hospital, and Harvard Medical School in Boston. In 2008, he experienced a transcendental near-death experience during a week-long coma from an inexplicable brain infection that completely transformed his worldview. A pioneering scientist and modern thought leader in the emerging science that acknowledges the primacy of consciousness in the universe, he is the author of the New York Times #1 bestseller, Proof of Heaven, The Map of Heaven, and Living in a Mindful Universe. Welcome, Dr. Alexander. How are you today?
Well, Nik, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me on, and I'm doing very well, thanks.
That's absolutely wonderful. I just want to start for everyone who may be unfamiliar with your origin story, if you want to give us some info on what was happening leading up to your NDE.
Okay, I think that background's very important. I grew up in a scientific family, very much. My father ran a neurosurgical training program, but he'd also been a combat surgeon in the Second World War, and I still have at my bedside a little pocket Bible, New Testament and Psalms, that he carried with him for more than 2 years as he worked as a combat surgeon in New Guinea, Philippines, finally up into Japan during 2.5 years of World War II. And it was I believe his faith in God that he had basically gotten from his dad, a general surgeon in Eastern Tennessee. So, and this is my adoptive father. That's another critical part of the story for those who don't know much about me, is that I was adopted into this wonderful, loving family. And of course, the adoption is a gigantic part of the resolution that I ended up getting out of my near-death experience. So the adoption is very relevant. The scientific upbringing is tremendously relevant. And I wanted to believe everything I heard in that Methodist church my dad took me to when I was a child, but I also knew by 6th grade that for me, science was the where you get the answers. And I even remember having this lively discussion with my 6th grade confirmation teacher in Methodist church, talking about Big Bang cosmology and how that was a better model of our origin than the Genesis story. Right. Anyway, bottom line is, like so many of us, I made a gigantic mistake. And I'll give you a quote here that references this mistake. And the quote is from Werner Heisenberg. He won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1932 for his work on the uncertainty principle in quantum mechanics. And he said that the first gulp from the glass of natural sciences will lead you towards atheism, but at the bottom of the glass, God is waiting for you. He knew the implications of quantum physics were gigantic, as did many other people at that time who recognized that, this connection between brain and mind that people thought they had some understanding about was really thrown up into the unknown with the advent of quantum physics and the uncertainty principle and all these other things. And the reason is that everything that has to do with the brain-mind connection is a quantum effect. So quantum physics is absolutely right there at the dead center of an understanding of the primacy of consciousness and an understanding that the brain is a filter transceiver that allows an eddy current of that God mind, that primordial unified mind, to come into us. And of course, that little eddy current of awareness we think is ours and ours alone. And yet scientific experiments like the Gansfeld experiments reveal very clearly that telepathy is absolutely a real part of the human condition. Guillaume Playfair, a rigorous scientific investigator, wrote a beautiful book called Twin Telepathy, in which he estimates that 35% of identical twins have powerful telepathic experiences. So anyway, what I'm trying to say is that quantum physics is deeply related to this question. I didn't realize how much before my coma, but because my coma was very definitive proof that the brain is not the creator of consciousness, mainly because of the damage that my meningitis did to my neocortex, that would have gotten rid of any chance of a dream or hallucination. much less what I actually went through. So this is kind of a long answer to your question, but that's the kind of background. I had come at all this as a scientist and finally realized that, yes, quantum physics and quantum mechanics in science is absolutely related to the brain-mind connection. In fact, our very sense of free will, I believe, is absolutely um, uh, shown by quantum indeterminacy. And so this is where the whole thing starts to get very exciting, and where the last 17 years of my life since my coma has been incredibly fruitful, working with scientists and other experiencers, and of course working with mediums and all kinds of others that can help us show that mind is much more than something generated by the brain.
I am so happy you started right off talking about science because I'm also a scientist, as you know. My master's degree is in astronomy and bachelor's in biology. And had I known what quantum physics was when I was 20 years old, that's the degree I would have gotten, because it is so perfect for mediumship. And so I transitioned from a science mind to this, oh, there's this other whole realm, and it relates directly to quantum physics. So I love
Right.
that you started off right with the science. I love it. I was watching another podcast with Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson yesterday, and he was, he tries he tries to sound like he's, being an open-minded scientist, but when it comes to the big problem of consciousness, he kind of veers off a little. And he explained that mediumship and psychics can't be real because the LIGO interferometer gravitational wave detector doesn't detect our powers. And I'm like, no, I did a study on LIGO and it has nothing to do with that. They're detecting black hole gravitational waves. That
Right.
is very, very big boom compared to our tiny little consciousness awareness. So I thought, how would you respond? And I can send you the link if you'd like, to Dr. Tyson when he explains that because the LIGO interferometer can't detect our connection to the spirit world, that it doesn't exist. That was his explanation.
I would say he's just basically looking in the wrong place. I wouldn't expect gravitational waves, that the ones we detect are generated by, black holes and neutron stars colliding with each other. These are gigantic events. And for him
Hundreds
to
of
say, well,
billions of times
LIGO doesn't detect a spirit, wave
Yeah.
or particle. And I'm going, well, why in the world would it?
Yeah.
I would advise that he look at the entanglement field. That's far more where the action is entanglement, this connection between particles. That was the source of the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2022 for 4 decades of work done by 3 scientists to prove that Einstein was wrong. That in fact, spooky action at a distance, this connection of particles across space and time, reveals a much deeper kind of information channeling system. And why Neil deGrasse Tyson would think you're going to be looking at gravitational waves to find this, I don't know. But the best place to look is in telepathy. Check out the experiments, the Gansfield experiments, and Guillaume Playfair's work, etc. And you'll realize that telepathy is absolutely scientifically a very real part of this world. And the problem with some scientists, and I think I respect Neil deGrasse Tyson. I think he's a very bright astrophysicist.
Me too.
But I don't think he necessarily knows so much about consciousness that he can make big claims about this. And that's where he starts to lose track. And also, I would say it's important to, part of the problem is that scientists, and I know this because I did it before my NDE, tend to focus on the things that they can actually measure and analyze and check out. And, there's, so it's kind of difficult sometimes to define the neural correlate of say, the beautiful smell of a rose or a gardenia or falling in love, things like that. These neural correlates are a hard thing to come by, but then you start realizing that there's so much evidence that consciousness is not created by the brain, but that in fact it's filtered in by the brain, and that consciousness is connected. That's why telepathy and the Gansfeld experiments are so important, because they show we're really sharing one mind. And most importantly, when you dive into near death experiences, and very related to them are something called shared death experiences, which
Hmm.
happen in perfectly healthy, normal people. Shared death might happen to a healthcare worker who's working with a dying patient, but much more commonly, they happen in relatives, in loved ones of a dying patient. And it doesn't matter if the people are 10,000 miles apart, because this connection of mind does not diminish with distance.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's another piece that Neil deGrasse Tyson would probably try to deny, and yet that would only be out of a position of willful ignorance, because the data is there. If you go to University of Virginia, Division of Perceptual Studies, uvadops.org, you'll find scientists who, for the last 6.5 decades, have been working on many aspects of mind beyond brain. And one of the biggest categories of their study is claims of past life memories in children suggestive of reincarnation.
Mhm.
And most of us say, hey, wait a minute, I don't remember past lives, so reincarnation can't be real. But what Ian Stevenson and Jim Tucker, the doctors who've done all that work, will tell you is you must harvest these memories from the child before age 6 or 7, because
Yes.
they're natural processes that cover up all those memories. And I think that's to give us a buy-in to this life. But there are plenty of children who speak of past lives. And the interesting thing is, when these scientists would investigate those cases, in 2,500 plus cases they investigated, more than 1,700 they have solved.
Mhm.
Solved means they found the person who lived before that fits the description that the child gives. So when you read this literature, you'll realize what I mean. It's very well done, because they knew they'd be shot down if they were careless. Very rigorous. Ian Stevenson, who originated this work, was a brilliant investigator, a towering intellectual giant. And he basically discovered reincarnation is real. They kept a low profile, because saying that kind of thing in a materialist scientific world can get you shot down. But the
Mhm.
good news is the world is finally waking up. And this is, I would say, our book, Proof of Heaven, was a starting point. But much more importantly is the third book. It's called Living in a Mindful Universe. And I co-wrote that with my wife and partner in this work, Karen Newell, who is also the co-founder of sacredacoustics.com. They provide incredibly powerful binaural beat brainwave entrainment
Mhm.
that I use an hour or two every single day, and have for the last 11 or 12 years in my exploration of consciousness. I highly recommend anybody who wants to get into meditation with a very powerful tool or set of tools, go to sacredacoustics.com to learn a lot more.
I
But
use binaural hemisync every time before I do a mediumship reading.
uh,
That originated, I believe, from the gateway process
right.
investigation. I guess the CIA did, which we could
Well,
literally go.
Stargate was, I think, what you might be referring to. That was the remote viewing program that Skip
Right,
Atwater and Joe McMoneagle and
right.
um, others had a lot to do with Stargate. But remote viewing is another beautiful example of mind beyond just this material realm.
Right. Yes. And I think they called the report the gateway processors. There's something associated with it, but
Well, there's the gate. I think there's another way the word gateway gets thrown in this conversation, and that is that there is a set of programs at the Monroe Institute where Robert Monroe did some of the pioneering work with binaural beat brainwave entrainment. And what their introductory program for beginners in meditation is called the Gateway Program.
okay. So I think that we could go in 100 different directions. I'm loving every single morsel about this conversation, more than you could ever imagine. I want to ask you about, how have you viewed or listened to the telepathy tapes, and how do you feel about that if you've listened to them?
Well, I'm sorry, I've heard about them through a bunch of colleagues. I have not yet had time to look at them myself. So
Okay.
I'm sorry I don't have a firsthand personal opinion on the telepathy tapes. Maybe you can kind of start with your interpretation, and I'll tell you how that matches up with what some of my colleagues who do this work on a regular basis have to say about it.
So there's two seasons. The first season was Kai Dickens, who is just a researcher and a podcaster, journalist type person, and she was investigating non-speaking autistic children who had been reported by their parents and teachers that they had telepathy. So when they would type, they could type out things that they were reading from other people's minds. Type or point to letters, pictures. They're called spellers. And so she did a whole season last year, and it was fascinating. And people were like, well, you didn't follow the scientific method. You could have done this better, that better, etc. So she continued with the second season, talking to mediums and psychics and people who had near-death experiences. And so I think you may just find it interesting. There's no exact conclusion. She's just presenting the evidence similar to what we're speaking on. So that's why I was asking. So there's no, everything, all scientific studies can be tightened up a little, right? Especially when there's so many variables with children and blindfolds and, things like that. So that brings us to the big problem of consciousness. Now, before your NDE, you were a neurosurgeon, right? How was your view on the afterlife or God or heaven compared to after your NDE? And how does that translate into the big problem of consciousness in your scientific mind?
Well, I think kind of the best way to put it is I mentioned earlier I'd grown up in the scientific family. I spent much of my life wanting to believe in spiritual matters. But in my career as a neurosurgeon, I remember mainly just kind of struggling with an understanding of how could conscious awareness continue beyond the death of the brain. And to me, that was a big mystery. As a neuroscientist, neurosurgeon, we spent a lot of time looking at the brain-mind connection, phenomenal experience, trying to make sense of it, looking for what are called neural correlates of consciousness, all that kind of thing. And I was basically, I think, frustrated in a lot of ways. Now, I would hear things from nurses and from patients and from families, that suggested to me I really did not have a very complete picture of what was going on with brain, mind, and consciousness. And that there was much more to the story, and the consciousness was a much bigger thing, and that it wasn't limited to an active brain. But making sense of that was a challenge to me. And that's why it's so important that I had this week in coma. So one of the greatest gifts of my life was to spend a week in deep coma due to a severe case of bacterial meningoencephalitis involving my entire brain, the entire surface of the brain and down in the brain stem. And it was a terribly severe case. And in fact, there's a medical case report that was written on my medical records. And it came out in September 2018. So it was 10 years after my coma. It was written by 3 doctors who were very impressed with my recovery, even though they weren't involved in my care. And they spent over 2 years going in great detail over my medical records and wrote that case report in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Disease. And they make it very clear that brain, and this is a conclusion I reached when I was first investigating my medical records in those first few months, that brain of mine was in no shape to have any kind of dream or hallucination, much less an extraordinary kind of hyperreal vision that went on for what seemed like months or years inside of this 7-day Earth coma, 7 Earth day coma. And the other important thing, the kind of backstory to that article, is the scientific peer review editors challenged these authors and said, well, how in the world do you explain this unprecedented, apparently miraculous recovery? And they said, it's because he had a near-death experience. That's what allowed for this profound healing. Wow. And that is where everybody should focus their attention, is my gosh. So the scientific peer review editors are awake enough to the nature of reality and these kind of clinical mysteries that they're open enough to realize, oh, well, this is how we explain it. These incredible spiritual journeys can be related to incredible healing. And of course, that's something doctors have known for ages, is there's a tremendous power our mind has in our own healing. Placebo effect.
Right.
Right. And placebo effect has been around for thousands of years, but it's been used as a tool for, controlled scientific studies in the modern era, because medical scientists and doctors came to realize that patients' beliefs, thoughts, and attitudes played a tremendous role in whether or not they could get better. I remember, I mean, even before my coma, before I knew all this, I realized I did a lot of work with malignant brain tumors, which are very, very deadly in both adults and children. And I knew if my patient didn't have a positive attitude, I was in deep trouble. So I had to do everything I could to try and give them a realistic chance for where we were headed. And yes, of course, the medical statistics might be kind of dire, but there was always room for improvement. And there was evidence from what we were doing with some of our patients that you can get kind of miraculous healing in some of these settings. But for me, it was an obvious fact that if my patient had given up or they didn't believe that they could do better, I was facing a tremendous headwater in trying to make them better. But then the whole world since then has dramatically improved in the ability to show us that mind over matter is a very real part of human health, healing, and wholeness. And this, of course, is where psychic mediums come in, because you guys can actually teach people that they can connect with loved ones because the loved ones are still there.
Yes.
And a big part of still there is pointing out that we're referring to a realm that is not stuck in Earth time. That is why people who have a near-death experience, about 50% of NDE reports include a life review. Your life flashing before your eyes. And I love how, that is, when you do scientific studies of life reviews, you start discovering all kinds of kind of powerful indicators that mind is primary in this universe. And if I could just spend a minute, I'd like to discuss life reviews.
Absolutely.
I couldn't have an Eben Alexander life review because of my amnesia. Very key element of my NDE, and one that I've never heard of as strongly in anybody else's NDE, was amnesia. I had no memory of my life. I had no language, no knowledge of Earth, universe. It was an empty slate. And only in the months and years after my coma did I realize why I had to go through such an extreme kind of journey of discovery. And that involved amnesia. So I had no memory for my life during the coma. My memories came back very rapidly over 2 months after coma. But when I first woke up after 7 days in coma, I didn't even recognize my loved ones at the bedside, my mother, my sisters, my sons. I was just beginning to kind of get all that back, and my language coming back, all those kind of things. But I did see life reviews in my journey, and it took me several years to even figure out what two major visions in what I call the core realm were, but they had everything to do with supporting the reality of reincarnation and life reviews. So in spite of not getting an Eben Alexander life review, I could see in a generic fashion, in a very powerful way, how life reviews worked. And in fact, my biggest vision was of this incredible network, a tapestry of interwoven threads of our lives, and every weave of the tapestry was birth, death, rebirth, with life reviews thrown in, all this kind of incredibly powerful stuff. Now, but again, to get back to a major discussion of life reviews, I refer to Bruce Grayson's work. Bruce Grayson is one of those investigators at University of Virginia. He's studied near-death experiences for the last 45 plus years. He's a very skeptical psychiatrist. He grew up in a biochemist family. But in a paper he wrote in the Journal of Near-Death Studies in the fall of 2021, there's several facts I'll give you about life reviews that are very important for explaining much of what's going on here. He said 37% involve the entire life. Okay. So, and people say, how can that be in a 10-minute cardiac arrest that you get your whole life reviewed? And it's because in that realm, you're absolutely gone from Earth time and the slavery to Earth time. You're in an eternal realm. And that's how come the entire life can be reviewed. 47% of his 700 life reviews, almost 700, said that they were a reliving of the events, not just a remembering, as if the events were still going on. That's an important point. 76% of his 700 cases of life reviews stressed that the review was from the perspective of everyone involved.
Mm,
I tell you how important that is. That
yes.
tells you we're sharing the dream of the one mind. We might call it our consciousness, but ultimately we're sharing that God mind. And that's a very important point, because that's why we can say the golden rule, treat others as you would like to be treated, is written into the very fabric of the universe. Because in a life review, you end up experiencing events from everybody's perspective. So if you were busy handing out pain and suffering to others, being greedy and selfish, you get on the receiving end of that during the life review. You realize it didn't feel good. And so you learn how to treat people with much more kind of respect and dignity as the sacred divine beings that we all are. And that's where the life review is truly the golden rule written into the very fabric of the universe. And the last fact from the Grayson paper was that 84% of those 700 life reviews said the events were more real than lived experience memories.
Mhm.
So in other words, you can't just believe that, life reviews are just a vague remembering and kind of dreaming about past events. It's a demonstration that the universe cares tremendously about our kind of interactions with self and others, and that there's a responsibility to take care of our fellow beings and not to mistreat them. This is why we often say the golden rule, treat others as you would like to be treated, is written into the fabric of the universe.
I love all of that, and I want to ask your opinion. I was doing a mediumship reading with a client, and their loved one in spirit was giving me information about their life review. And that's not usual for my mediumship readings. It was an unusual situation.
Uh,
And when they gave me the information, they said not only did my actions, the person in spirit's actions affect you, but there was a ripple effect that everyone that you affected because of my actions, I affected you and you affected other people. This person in spirit said, I felt all of that too. And that's how it works. And so I just wanted to ask, did you have any sense of that? Because that was the only time I have experienced that in one of my readings.
Absolutely. In fact, I often tell the story of my NDE, and it starts in what I call the earthworm eye view, this primitive, coarse, kind of subterranean, murky starting point. But then I went up through a wormhole of pure light, a portal up into this rich, ultra real gateway valley. And
Mm,
that's the place where life reviews would happen. We'd reunite with souls of departed loved ones, go through life review, then plan next incarnations and dive back in. But then I went beyond that, beyond this boundary that seems to exist between that world and my next level in the spiritual journey, which was a place I call the core. And that was also achieved through witnessing collapse of four-dimensional space-time, collapse of that eternal spiritual realm, ascending into this oneness, this pure oneness with that God force, where I came to recognize that God force, and it doesn't matter if you want to call it God, Allah, Brahman, Vishnu, Jehovah, Yahweh, Great Spirit, Tao. There are many words people use, but ultimately we're talking about the same thing. And
right.
that's what's so important is, religions tend to get conflicted and ideological and start punching with each other. And the deeper reality from the world of near-death experiences is there's one infinitely loving God force, and that is the source of our very conscious awareness. We're never separate from that God force. And in that core realm where all dualities, masculine, feminine, good, evil, dark, light, every bit of it coalesces back into pure oneness. That's where I had these tremendous visions that included the visions that demonstrated the reality of life reviews and of reincarnation. And so to me, those and the way you described that a minute ago brings back my memory of what I call Ender's Net. That's a name I gave it, years after the event. It took me several years to even figure out what all this meant and how to put it together. But Ender's Net was a vision I had in the core of all those interwoven threads, golden, silvery threads, higher dimensional space. This was not confined to a 3D space. There was no end to these threads, except they all united in this golden center of
Mhm.
pure God consciousness. And that was the beautiful vision. But that interweaving was the interesting thing, because I saw how every action that we take in this world. In fact, our thoughts have these repercussions that reflect through this incredible network, basically without limit. So our thoughts, our actions, our activities in this world are impactful. And likewise, from the events of other sentient beings and their activities, it all comes back to us. So we're part of this tremendous interactive web, which I ended up calling Indra's Net after one of the visions out of Eastern spiritual traditions. But to me, it was this beautiful fabric. And in fact, Karen and I are working now on some ideas where we've kind of adopted the name of living tapestry, which I think explains beautifully how this interweaving of our soul lines is something that people can visualize in meditation. But the good news is that that love and kindness and compassion and mercy and acceptance that we learn through NDEs are the main principles of living our lives here, and that we're truly here to take care of all of our fellow spiritual beings, and that certainly includes the least, the last, and the lost. These are all gifts. And when you realize that interconnectedness and this beautiful network that reflects the love and compassion and kindness that we can all share, that's where the world starts to become a far more comforting, resonant, and prosperous place, where we're really sharing these beautiful lessons of love, kindness, and compassion, which are the ultimate lesson of near-death experiences. So to me, it's kind of a natural follow-up to come to this conclusion, and it's really something this world needs to hear right now. There's a lot of polarization, conflict, warfare was kind of on the way out in the late 20th, early 21st century, and yet we've had these horrific kind of backslides in the form of Russia invading Ukraine with absolutely no reason whatsoever. And of course, all the horrific trouble in the Middle East. And it's high time that we realize that those are, warfare and conflict are the results of the mistaken thinking, the bleak and paltry fiction of materialism that pretends that we're separate beings, that we're in conflict with each other, as opposed to acknowledging this deep lesson coming out of the modern scientific study of brain, mind, and the nature of reality that says, no, we're sharing one consciousness. We're sharing one mind. We're all in this together. And we're here to help each other. And it's all about love and compassion and kindness. These are the deep lessons that emerge from the NDE community. And I believe that over the last decade and the coming decade or so, they're changing the world dramatically for the better. So it's high time we paid attention to these lessons. And also, I'd like to give a resource to your people. If you haven't mentioned this resource before, it's bigelowinstitute.org. The Bigelow Institute ran an essay contest among scientists back in 2021. What's the best evidence for the afterlife? And Robert Bigelow was going to give out 3 monetary awards, but the essays were so good from all over the world. He received 204 essays, all from scientists who had at least 5 years research experience studying the afterlife. And he ended up giving out 29 monetary awards. Wow. And all 29 of those essays are available for free at bigelowinstitute.org. Now, they're deep and scientific, but any scientist who's out there claiming that the afterlife is woo-woo nonsense, that scientist now has to confess that they're being willfully ignorant. Because once you start reading the bigelowinstitute.org essays, you'll realize scientifically the reality of the afterlife has been, or eternity of consciousness has been established beyond any reasonable scientific doubt. Now, how it all works is still quite a mystery, and we've got a tremendous amount of theoretical work to do. And in fact, I would remind people, if you really want to start getting to the nature of reality, pay big attention to all those things I just mentioned about life reviews, because every bit of that is showing that reality and this universe works in a very different fashion than materialism would predict or try and propose. And the fact that the universe cares so much about sentient beings that we have this huge theater of operations where we revisit our lives, connect with souls of departed loved ones, relive the many important events of our lives. In many ways, as they're being kind of relived and kind of reworked. I mean, this is all about our soul journey and paying big attention to what that involves. And for whatever reason, the universe and that God force are paying huge attention to each and every one of us individually. So we should pay much more attention to how we treat each other and even treat ourselves.
Right. And it's analogous to, forest. A forest has trees and birds and lizards and flowers and grasses. And you have a deer and a lion, maybe, if you get rid of the predator, the deer overpopulate and die anyway,
Right.
right? So we
There's a
have to
balance.
have a balance.
Right.
So for those who don't understand the bigger universal picture of the collective consciousness, it's about balancing an ecosystem. And it's important. I like to call God the collective consciousness
Mhm.
because it kind of covers everything, and we are all connected. And when we forget that, that's when we run into problems. And I
Right.
like that you mentioned at the end of the 20th, beginning of the 21st, we thought we were on our way to like getting rid of all this stuff. And now the pendulum has swung so far the other way. However, my goal is raising the vibration. Going forward in 2026, I want to have conversations like this where we raise the vibration and let people know exactly what you said. What affects one affects all, whether you realize it or not, the butterfly effect, right? I also wanted to say that you were talking about other worlds earlier. I can't remember exactly how you referenced it. Do you have any insight? Because as an astronomer and an astrobiologist, that's my field of study. It's finding life on Mars is my expertise technically. And I know that the universe is extraordinarily large, trillions and trillions and trillions of galaxies, multiply that by hundreds of billions, and that's how many planets you get. So there's enough time and space and places in the universe for there to be a 100% chance of life on other planets. That's a direct quote from Dr. Sarah Seeger from MIT. And do you have any experience or opinion of have we had lives on other planets as sentient beings?
Well, I must say, in one thing that has been a gift about all this is by sharing my story publicly, a lot of people share their story back with me. So I've heard many, many different things, and I take it all with a grain of salt. I'm just logging it, paying attention,
Mhm.
and saying, my knowledge base is quite small compared to the nature of reality. So I'm open to whatever people can tell me. And then I start using discernment and paying attention to what I think is realistically possible or plausible in various situations. Um, and I know I mentioned in the book Proof of Heaven an awareness I had deep in my coma journey of many other civilizations that were
Mhm.
vastly superior to ours. In fact, I think the comparison I used in Proof of Heaven was I said there was far evolved beyond us as we are beyond earthworms. So to me, part of my spiritual journey was this profound awareness of many, many other civilizations, and many of which would uh, be so far advanced beyond us. Just like Arthur C. Clarke said, advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Uh,
Yes.
and that's what we'd be interpreting. I love this recent, interstellar object of 3AI Atlas that came
Right.
racing through or still racing through our solar system right now. I love how Avi Loeb has been, at Harvard, has been writing uh, what I think is very intelligent analysis and observation of such an object. And to me, it's important to keep your mind open to the possibilities. And certainly for something like that, it could be an indicator that we're dealing with an artifact from a technologically advanced civilization that just happens to be passing through.
Eh,
So I'm
yeah.
I'm quite open to it. I believe that I had some discussions with Edgar Mitchell about this. He was the Apollo 14 astronaut, and
Mhm.
I was fortunate enough to stay in his home several times back after Proof of Heaven came out. Got to know him quite well. Wonderful, wonderful person. He's the one who, was on the Apollo 14 mission as the lunar module pilot. But also he was so inspired by this incredible vision, Samadhi vision he had coming back from the moon when he was basically, as he put it, unemployed, because he'd been the limb pilot and they were done with that part of the mission. So he had some time to look out the window. And as he's watching out the window, as the spacecraft is rotating every few minutes, he would see Earth, Sun, Moon go by, every few minutes. And all those stars out there, you could see 10 times as many stars as we can see from the ground. And he had this profound, life-changing event where he became one with the consciousness of the universe at large. And that's why he started the Institute of Noetic Sciences. And I know Dean Radin personally. Dean Radin is an excellent investigator, has done fantastic scientific work to help illuminate kind of the edges of this world that we're talking about here. But Edgar Mitchell, in our discussions, there was a lot that he acknowledged about the reality of some of these extraterrestrial type effects, orbs around nuclear weapon sites, also around missile silos and military satellites, things like that, that he thought was a very real intervention. And his idea was that they're here to help. And that I agree. That's my overall interpretation. I believe that advanced civilizations are already here among us. Kind of, this UAP phenomena has certainly not been explained away by materialist pseudo explanations. And I think the more we dig in deep, the more we'll realize that there are intelligent beings with very advanced technologies available. And I think they're here to help. They're not here to hurt. God knows we've got enough people on Earth that are doing enough horrible damage to our world. We need help from the outside, I guess, to bring it all back into alignment and to kind of help us get on track. But from my perspective, the advanced civilizations do exist, and I think they are interacting with us, and I think they're here to help us survive our own most ignorant and stupid human impulses, like having nuclear weapons.
Right.
We should get rid of every nuclear weapon now.
There's
and
no
the people
reason.
of the earth should rise up against all autocratic leaders, throw them out. Do not let any government continue to harbor nuclear weapons, because they're only going to be used against the people of this world by, insane, mad people who want to destroy the world. And so let's get rid of these weapons now, so we're not prone to having the kind of leaders that can emerge now. It is frightening.
Frightening.
Of them having any kind of control of these weapons. And I include,
Yeah. You don't even have to say it.
I don't talk politics. I'd like to avoid it, but
Yeah.
we need to take responsibility as humans.
Right.
And the biggest con game in history was the buildup of nuclear weapons after World War II. Just a horrible shame.
I agree completely. And I have so many different directions. My mind is just racing from that whole area of information. One of the questions I get the most from my students as an astronomy professor is, are there aliens, and are they here to kill us? And I'm always like, listen, if aliens wanted to kill us, they'd have killed us hundreds of thousands of years ago. And they could do it without firing a shot. They would drop a virus in a few little spots. It would spread like that. We'd all be dead before we knew it. We would never even know they were there. So if they wanted us dead, we'd have been dead. They're trying to save us from ourselves, if anything.
Yeah. Well, sadly, that's kind of an uphill battle these days. But the good news is this revolution in the understanding of the nature of reality to a much more spiritual interpretation.
Yes.
That we're spiritual beings in a spiritual universe is absolutely the result of all those scientific papers at bigelowinstitute.org. They basically say you bring science and spirituality together.
Yes.
They strengthen each other. That's how we move forward as a sentient civilization, is through acknowledging our oneness of consciousness, the binding force of love, the healing and wholesome power of that love that is such a rich, real ingredient of our being, to people who've had NDEs. But that's where I encourage people to meditate. Karen and I have run meditation workshops around the world. And one thing that's clear is with meditation and centering prayer, any mode of going within, and successfully exploring consciousness, you start to realize we're sharing one mind and we're all in this together. And so to hurt another is to hurt yourself.
Right.
That's the biggest lesson of those life reviews and that golden rule written in the fabric of the universe. So we will start seeing some major adjustments here over the next decade or so, because this is taking over. This kind of thinking of the scientific community, the unity of consciousness, the voice of the NDE community, and certainly it's a voice that's echoed from the psychic medium community and others. In fact, a few minutes ago, what crossed my mind as you were talking about some of these topics and some of the current hardships and all that, as I know, Karen, my wife, has introduced me to astrology in a more modern setting. And when I say more modern, I would say, for example, if you go read Richard Tarnas' Cosmos and Psyche, you start to realize how astrology might be applicable in some kinds of settings. And to me, especially important is acknowledging, we look at the madness here at 250 years birthday of this country. And to me, it's an anathema that we have the current government is just absolutely just horrifying to be celebrating our 250th birthday. And this is where you have to pay attention to hardships and challenges are gifts. They are tools for potential growth. Yes. And what I'll point out there is from the astrology world, we're in the Pluto return. Pluto orbits every roughly 250 years. So we're at the Pluto return of the birth of this country. It should not surprise anybody who pays attention to astrology in a bigger sense that this is kind of like a test. This is kind of like refacing the issues of our origins as a country and being challenged. And you have to rise above the challenge. And we have to do that, not by succumbing to the madness and mayhem of the current ruling elites, but actually realize that we can shift this, that we as human beings, as a democratic experiment, liberal democracy, can actually push back against this insanity of our current political system and end up getting us into the next 250 years, which hopefully will be far more successful.
Right. I like to say, evolve or die. Right? That's a quote you hear. We need to evolve or it's not going to make it. And it's up to us. We can't just sit here and scroll on Instagram and Twitter to try and make it better. No, we have to actively participate in the way we can. Not everybody can march in the streets, right? So that's not for everybody, but there are things everyone can do. And sometimes that's just being at peace, because when you're at peace, you're vibrating at a frequency of peace, right? So we don't always have to, and Eckhart Tolle says, what you resist persists. So the more we're pushing up against it, the more it's pushing back. And that's why this current last 10 years has persisted, because everybody's like resisting. It's like, there's a different way to go about it. There's a side door. There's a side door we need to go in and open it up. And I just had a wonderful conversation with Suzanne Giesman, who's a super amazing medium. And she said, enter everything with love, because when you enter any of these situations with love, it annihilates the hate. And the problem is, if everyone would have started meditating from birth, we would have solved 99% of our problems, because all of these problems are ego-based, every single one. And children who didn't have enough proper love has caused all of this. That's my motherly opinion.
Right. Well, I think there's tremendous truth to every bit of that. And, NDEers for thousands of years have come back saying love is the only thing that matters. And they realize love is what comes into their life. So they never fear death again. They realize that living this life of harmony, love, and compassion, helping their fellow beings, that is a pathway forward that basically rules by attraction. And the more people can see of the success of that, the more it will happen. And also, I would point out, you don't have to have 100% of people on earth meditating. There are
Right.
experiments 20, 30 years ago in transcendental meditation communities that showed that basically 3% was sufficient. If 3% of the population was meditating, that was enough to give a very significant nudge
Yeah.
to bigger events going on, like crime statistics and things like that in a community. But I think for any of us, the good news is a lot of this madness, as you say, is ego based.
Yeah.
And so we can retreat from the ego in meditation. I know when I go into meditation, my little ego mind, Eben Alexander's voice in his head, can make a request or an observation or a comment, but then that voice goes into timeout because
Hmm.
I've learned that there's part of me, that higher soul aspect, the part that expands tremendously when you leave the body at bodily death. That part you can develop a relationship with. The ego is not who you are. That voice in your head. I love how Michael Singer, in his book *The Untethered Soul*, he
Hmm.
calls the voice in your
Beautiful.
head your annoying roommate.
Right.
That's it. End of story. Don't start thinking that is who you are. And this is where meditation and centering prayer can open people up to the much grander aspects of who they truly are. And that grander part is the part that lives beyond bodily death and is not slave to the demands of the ego. So there
And
is,
go ahead.
I was just going to say a lot of really good things can happen to people, especially if you're worried about anxiety and concerns about this world, if you start meditating.
Yeah,
Spend 20
absolutely.
minutes, 30 minutes, an hour or so a day um, in meditation, centering prayer. And in fact, if you learn more about NDEs, all of that can help you in this literature. In our books, Living in a Mindful Universe is the one that really goes a long way towards uniting the science and spirituality, and also giving a lot of clues about meditation and how
Mhm.
people can more effectively start to communicate with that one mind and connect with that God mind through meditation. And that really changes your life. And, it's all about mind over matter,
Yes.
acknowledging that the physical world emerges from the apparent physical world, emerges from the realm of the mental.
Right.
And this is where mind over matter placebo effect is the beginning of that. But then you can move through more powerful territory, spontaneous remission. For example, go to noetic.org, Noetic Sciences, a website, put in spontaneous remission. You'll find a book they published in the mid 90s on 3,500 cases of people with terminal cases of cancer, infection, etc., who were able to use kind of spiritual, mental ways to get healing, even when all of Western medicine had failed them.
Right.
And in fact, Helene Wabe at Institute of Noetic Sciences is redoing that database now with
Mm.
30 more years of data. I cannot wait to see that report.
Yeah,
Uh,
with the
because
state of
I'm
the
sure,
medical system the way it is now, we're gonna need a lot more, healing, mind
right,
over matter, placebo effect healing. I
right.
have a
Mind
friend
over matter.
Yeah, I have a friend who's had stage 4 plus cancer for 5 years or so, and she's using her spiritual practice to keep it at bay, which is
Uh-huh.
stunningly amazing. I wanted to ask you as we're coming to the end of the hour, um, as you were having your near-death experience and unfolding and unpacking it over the years, how do you, interpret the non-locality of our consciousness? Like, how as you were trained as a neurosurgeon and went through medical school and all the material, it's
Mhm.
just the brain and the things in there, and then you had this profound experience. Did that, lead you to understand non-locality of the consciousness?
Yes, I'll tell you, here's basically the answer to your question, as I came to realize that everything that I witness around me, the people around me, the things, the environment, etc., as I move through this world, every bit of that is a projection of consciousness.
Mhm.
To consider that it has some fundamental basis in this thing we call physical reality is very misleading. And
Mhm.
this is why I stress that of those 700 life reviews that Bruce Grayson reported on in 2021, pay attention to what the people are saying. So in those 700 cases, you have this major story where they're reliving the events. The events are more real than when they're lived through in the material realm. They're lived through from the perspective of everyone involved. And in fact, I was reading an account a few weeks ago where a guy who had had a near-death experience when he was a child, drowning, he revisited that in a meditation.
Mm.
And in that revisitation, I'm sorry, it was not in a meditation, but in another NDE that he had as an adult. And when he revisited the childhood NDE, he could count the number of mosquitoes in the air. I mean, it's a detail, it's ultra real. It's not some vague, murky, dreamlike state. So we've got to open to the fact that this universe and our existence as sentient beings is far more important in this universe than we might have thought before. All of us are an integral part of this Indra's net, as I put it, interwoven network. And we're here to really, change the world for the better, to make it a better place. And these are all the tools we can use to do that. So, science and spirituality together, but also note that the big power of the current scientific understanding of consciousness is that we're truly sharing one mind. In fact, in those Bigelow essays, you'll find the first place winner was Jeffrey Mishlove. He wrote a fantastic essay. I highly recommend it. Second place winner out of the 29 that were awarded was Pim van Lommel. He's a good friend of ours, a cardiologist in the Netherlands. He wrote a landmark paper in a highly esteemed journal Lancet in 2000, where he reviewed more than 350 cardiac arrest patients in the Netherlands and found an 18% incidence of near-death experiences. Pim van Lommel wrote an excellent essay for Bigelow. And at the end of it, he starts moving towards this one mind hypothesis. And he says the best resources for understanding the one mind now, one is Larry Dossey's book, One Mind, which I highly recommend. Incredibly good book. He also recommends Steve Taylor's book on spiritual science. He recommends a scientific paper by Bernardo Kastrup. It's in the Journal of Consciousness Studies in 2018. It's called The Universe in Consciousness. And he recommends our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, as the fourth major resource on the one mind. I think if you read those four resources, you'll quickly see where all this is going and realize the scientific evidence is overwhelming. Yeah, there is one mind, and we're all sharing it. And understanding the details, we'll have to work on that. There are more details to be discovered, but ultimately we're all in this together. And that's why the binding force of love is so important to acknowledge, because we can help each other. And this is really all about acknowledging that the world is abundant, although we do have to be careful about overstepping and ripping too much resource away from this planet, as witness climate change and our addiction to fossil fuels, which is absolutely real. Anybody out there who doesn't understand that climate change is on the verge of killing off this planet needs to do their homework. And we all need to take action and burn less carbon-based fuels, come up with more sustainable energy, and probably just get used to not ripping as many resources from a finite, limited Earth. But ultimately, this is really about coming into more of a peaceful and harmonious state with our planet and with each other. And that is a mission that absolutely is strengthened by this acknowledgement of the one mind and of our ability to manifest free will to get the world of our dreams into this physical world.
Right. And I taught environmental science for many years, and I used to tell my students, we are not destroying the earth. We're destroying the ecosystems we rely on to survive, right? And so if we want to be here, we need to stop pillaging. I'll say, I won't say the other word, I'll say pillaging.
Well, and there are literally 1 million species that are going to be threatened with extinction if we don't change our ways over the next decade or so.
Oh, right.
And they've taken, millions, tens, hundreds of millions of years to evolve. So what a horrible tragedy to have any of these life forms go extinct. And yet many of them are threatened by the current buildup of carbon dioxide and global warming. which is an
Absolutely agree.
undeniable reality of our modern scientific world. And anybody who denies it is a dangerous fool that needs to be moved away from any position of power.
Well, and it's not just the people in the positions of power, it's people on podcasts who are spreading misinformation because they're not scientists or they're getting paid by fossil fuel
Right.
industries to say it or write papers. And that's a whole other
Right.
story for another day. But
Well, I can
do
show
your
you.
due diligence when you for anybody listening, actually read real scientific studies and don't
Right.
listen to bros on
The
podcasts.
pros may not have it quite right. I can show you a paper from 1912 where a scientist was making the case in England that if they kept burning wood and coal at that rate, the planet would heat up. And ultimately, he knew carbon dioxide was a very stable molecule, and ultimately, the planet would heat up from greenhouse gas effects. And it's happening. And that was something known, more than 100 years ago. So
Right,
let's get with the program, people, and wake up.
right,
And we're
right.
not trying to destroy this planet. We need to save it.
Yes, because the higher consciousness is arriving faster than anybody can
Right.
imagine. And that is the purpose of conversations like this. Science and spirituality are buddies, they're partners, they work together. And Dr. Alexander, I absolutely enjoyed this conversation. I could talk for 5 more hours with you easily, but I want to be respectful of your time. Proof of Heaven and Dr. Alexander's other books. I didn't even get to my questions about the book. I had some pages.
Well, I'll tell you what, if you read Living in a Mindful Universe, then maybe we can come back and have another conversation.
I will
So I
order
think
it as soon as
that'll give you a lot of kind of information to help us move to the next level here.
I will
So,
order
and
it as
also,
soon as we go
people
off here.
people can learn a lot at ebenalexander.com, especially at FAQ page. Go to sacredacoustics.com to learn more about meditation. And also, I'd offer up innersanctumcenter.com. That's another INNER sanctumcenter.com. That's another website Karen and I have done. It has more than 50 interviews for free that were done during the pandemic with scientists around the world and other experiencers. Other things available there at innersanctumcenter.com. But there are a lot of resources, and I'd especially also recommend on ebenalexander.com, 33-day journey into the heart of consciousness. Go to that website, ebenalexander.com, 33-day journeys right there on the welcome page. Put in your name and email address, and you're off and running on a 33-day email drip campaign that will quickly bring you up to speed on a lot of this. Plus, it has 4 embedded Sacred Acoustics meditation files that are available at no cost within that 33-day journey. So
Absolutely wonderful. I will link all of those websites in the show notes, as many as I have. And thank you so much, Dr. Alexander, for your time. If you all have any questions, all the links will be below. And I hope you all have a wonderful and peaceful day. And I am going to order that book as soon as we get off here.
all right. Thanks so much, Nik. Great talking with you.
Thank you so much.